I'd like to speak to you about Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So this is a very, very old book. Patanjali himself lived about 2,300 years ago. And they described his career as a grammarian. So he was some sort of a writer. You know, many of the people who wrote the scriptures were poets, actually. So the writer of the Shiva Sutras. The Bhagavad Gita, nobody really knows who wrote it, but the Yoga Vasishta was written by a poet. So when they say Patanjali was a grammarian, he may have been dabbling in poetry also. What you should know is that the ancient science of yoga was secret, and it was secretly passed between sages and siddhas. S-I-D-D-H-A. Siddha is somebody who has made contact with their soul. And we won't say that they were a secret society, but they certainly did communicate the fundamentals of yoga in secret code and poetry. The reason was yoga was so powerful that they didn't want the wrong ruler to get a hold of this science, because it makes a very powerful man or woman out of it. In this talk, I want to give you some of the main points of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. The Patanjali Yoga Sutras is a very practical book, showing you step by step how to get to God. And the exercises in there are very practical. So there are exercises about detachment. There are exercises about breathing, how to concentrate your mind. So it's so beautiful that so many years ago, somebody wrote a concise book of techniques about how to find God. It's a very practical book. That's why it's so well loved, you know. And so let's begin with Patanjali's main statement. He says, as long as the mind is not still, as long as there are thought waves, which he called vritti, those thought waves come and overlay themselves on the present moment. So when you're looking out to a scene, a beautiful scene, if you have a thought, you notice that that thought comes and lays itself over the scenery. So although your eyes are seeing the mountain, your mind is now full of thought, and therefore you've lost attention. You're not really seeing that mountain anymore. So vritti is a mental fluctuation. It's basically a bubble of thought that overlays itself on the present moment. If you're not seeing the present moment, you cannot be seeing God, because the God force is only visible instantaneously in the moment. So he says, unless you still your mind, you cannot be in touch with the source of life. That's his first statement. And secondly, he talks about samskaras. A samskara, in modern terms, is the conditioning of the subconscious mind. Patanjali says, whenever you repeat a thought several times, you cut a groove on the surface of the subconscious. The more you repeat that thought, the deeper the groove gets. But you can use this in the positive sense. If you say to yourself, you know, good for you, you're so capable, you're so smart, you're such a good mother, you're doing the same thing. You're cutting a positive groove on the surface of your mind. Unfortunately, most mental statements lean towards the negative. But now that you know what a samskara is and you know how it works, use it in the constructive sense. Any repetitive thought cuts a groove on the surface of the subconscious. What Patanjali says in ancient terms is very beautiful. He says, if you have a current of water going from left to right constantly, you're going to build a mound of sand on the ocean floor, because the current of water is always going in one way. So he says, in order to flatten this mound, you have to introduce a wave in the opposite direction. And if those waves are more numerous than the previous waves, then the, let's say, the opposing positive waves will get rid of that mound of sand, which is really pointing to some sort of mental condition. What does that mean in positive or in modern terms? In modern terms, they talk about positive affirmations or creative visualization. What does that mean? An affirmation is a short sentence recited with a verb in the present tense. The sentence contains the word I, and the verb ends with ing. So, I am becoming healthy, or I am healthy. Becoming is a better verb because it shows the flow and the work in progress. When you mention the sentence as work in progress, your subconscious mind says, oh, we are becoming, we are in the process of becoming healthier. If you say, I will become healthy, subconscious mind does not react to that. Subconscious mind likes a sentence cited in the present tense. So you see, something that Patanjali mentioned 2,300 years ago, in terms of introducing a wave in the opposite direction, now they have the equivalent in psychology called a positive affirmation or a visualization. In visualization, you close your eyes and imagine something happening which is in the opposite direction of the negative trend currently happening in your life. So, if you're not doing well with your business, close your eyes several times a day and first visualize progress. If you can't visualize it, it's very difficult to come up with progress, because your mind is being bombarded by discouraging messages. Samskara, by the way, according to yoga and the Buddhists, one of the biggest enemies to humankind is a samskara. Samskara is self-hypnosis. So if you self-hypnotize yourself in the negative sense, it's very difficult to recover from that. If you self-hypnotize yourself in the positive direction, you start to build self-confidence. Somebody may ask, well, what's the difference between a positive affirmation and being a fancy-free, fantasizing type of person who sees a pie in the sky? It's very different. When you do visualization and affirmation, you're working on yourself. In other words, as part of your self-study, as part of your religion, your personal religion, you're doing daily affirmations to build yourself up because you want to do something great with your life. So it's very different from fantasizing in your living room with no action taken afterwards. Patanjali goes on to say that the mind is a rambling mind. In yoga they say that the lower mind, manas is the lower mind. It's the one that's constantly thinking. Buddhi is the upper mind. In between those two, you have the subconscious mind. So you have manas, the one who's thinking all the time. Buddhi, who is in touch with creativity, intuition, universal information. And then in the middle, the subconscious, which is like an iceberg. 7/8 of it is hidden from you. This is why anything that's unconscious to you starts to control your life in a big way. So your task is to narrow the gap between the conscious mind, manas, and the subconscious mind. And then of course, as your meditation becomes deeper, you start to access buddhi. Once you start accessing buddhi, you start to get insights, instantaneous insights, inventions, poetry, solutions to problems just flow to your mind in the middle of meditation. Patanjali says, because the mind is a rebel, you need to control it. But you do not control the mind by grabbing hold of it and forcefully stopping its thoughts. Patanjali says the way to quiet the mind is to witness it. As if you put your hand under your chin and you start staring at manas. As you start staring at the mind, because it has an inferiority complex, it will stop talking. Anytime you truly, truly stare at the mind, it's like, oh, hello friend, what are you thinking next? If you watch it that vigilantly, it'll immediately go quiet. It has an inferiority complex. All you've got to do is watch it. So this is so ingenious of Patanjali, because he uses no force. He says, it is useless for you to control your mind. All you have to do is shine the light of mindfulness, consciousness, and then it'll go quiet. Then Patanjali says, in order to become master of your life, you must develop detachment. Patanjali says, the notion of spirituality without detachment is useless. You cannot understand spirituality without detachment. So then we have to pause for a few minutes and describe what we mean by detachment, because there's a lot of false notions and misunderstandings about detachment. A lot of people think that detachment is a sort of depression where you don't really care about the goings-on in this world, or you're not joyful, you don't enjoy your ice cream cone, or you never fall in love. This is what people think of detachment. None of these are true. In yoga, detachment means the essence of you is spirit and light. That spirit has come into this body to play for 85, 90 years. Because it's playful and because it's made of light, it can enjoy the ice cream, but it sees the ice cream as something external to spirit. And any external object which is not really of light and of permanence, anything impermanent is fleeting. So then you cannot invest yourself in a fleeting moment or an impermanent object. So if you become attached to your physical beauty, we're not saying you're going to lose beauty altogether. Your beauty is going to change as a grandmother. So it's not lack of beauty, the form changes. Same thing with your income, may go up and down. With your car that you love so much, the car starts to become older. So these are all impermanent. So detachment means enjoy it, your spirit, your light, having come into this body to enjoy. However, as you're enjoying, you need to have the discernment and the wisdom to see the difference between what's real and permanent, like love, and what's impermanent, like the Mercedes. Great car, enjoy it, but as you're sitting behind that steering wheel, be light, be spirit, driving the Mercedes. So just know, there are a lot of misunderstandings about this word detachment. It doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean depression. Detachment is not reserved for old people who are done with the enjoyments of life. None of that. Detachment means your center, your essence is made of the Holy Spirit. That spirit can get into a body and drive a Mercedes and enjoy it. But because it's spirit, it doesn't consider any material object as its possession. It simply enjoys and then passes by. Even your children are born onto you, but you're providing them with protection, love, food, and then they one day wing away. They don't go away forever, but they're not yours in the sense of possession. You can't possess love. Love is very free. Patanjali also mentions that you can turn your eyes and your attention in two directions. You can choose to turn your attention outward, and you can choose to turn your attention inward. All of spirituality says, if you become outwardly oriented, you lose power. In other words, in the infinite, endless variety of the world, you will become tired and confused. Again, what I just said has nothing to do with becoming antisocial. What you will discover is that when you develop your inner life, when you enjoy your plants, when you enjoy your poetry, you play your guitar, you tend to cut down on the constant social life a little bit and enjoy your inner life. That's not the same thing as becoming antisocial. You just develop a healthy personal boundary, and then once in a while you socialize. That's it. So the outward gaze will fatigue the nervous system because there's an endless variety. What the ancient Indian scriptures, the Vedantas, say is that in the beginning you have a formless God force. It is a subatomic light and presence. It lacks form. The God force is everything in its future potential. In other words, the Vedas say that God is in the form of pure consciousness. It is this ocean just humming, Om. And everything in that Om is in potential seed form. When the atoms within that ocean gel together, you have the first instance of creation. So I want to tell you the difference between creation and meditation. They go in two opposite directions. So listen to this. First you have this silent ocean of creation. It's known to be still, it's made of light, it's subatomic, and it lacks form. But it contains the seed and the potential for everything. Then within that ocean, sometimes you get a tiny ripple. When that ripple occurs, consciousness is transformed into motion. So we have two names in Sanskrit for this. The silent, unmoving potential is called Shiva. It's just pure intelligence before it has gelled into an object. And then as soon as you get a ripple in that ocean of creation, then you have Shakti. Shakti means power or movement. So God has two forms. The expanded form of God is eternal, unmoving potential, intelligence. Then when that ocean moves, you have motion. And in the Vedas, they call the unmoving potential a feminine force, and they call the movement a masculine force. This could have been symbolic. It may have nothing to do with the physical presence of women and men, because you have extremely dynamic women. So listen to that piece of writing as a symbolic piece of writing. Coming back to the difference between creation and meditation. In creation, an unformed, unmanifested God force that contains the seeds of all potential begins to gel together as an atom. As those atoms come together, then you have an object. So an object is the accumulation of several million billion atoms coming together to form the manifest world. Now, why is meditation different from that? If you want to learn true meditation, you must learn how to decompose. Meditation is the process of visualizing that your cells, molecules, and atoms are falling away, decomposing into nothingness. And interestingly enough, you gain your powers when you decompose. As a composed human being, you have muscular power. As a metaphysician who has decomposed, you have the power to stir the atoms in order to manifest. Going on with some of Patanjali's main points in the Yoga Sutras, he says spiritual practice has 3 levels: mild, medium, intense. Very logical statement. If you go to take piano lessons with your best friend, one of you could be an intense practitioner of the piano. The second one would be a medium level student. Has to do with the intensity of your practice. So Patanjali is very blunt. He says, if you want to see God in this lifetime, you have to be an intense practitioner. What does that mean? Every moment when you're walking, you're chanting the Om. 1,700 times a day, you become mindful of your breathing movement. You breathe 21,600 times per day. If you just become conscious of 1,700 of those movements, within a year, you will have reached Samadhi, or the highest state of meditation. Patanjali says that God is a word. So did Christ. So you listen to the biblical saying, in the beginning there was the Word was with God, the Word was God. This word is the primal sound of Om. Om is the sound of the vibrational frequency of a subatomic God force. That's it. It's the sound of a vibration. When you chant Om, you stabilize your emotions, you stabilize your mind. So let's go back to the intense student of yoga. That student is saying affirmations, visualizing a better life, chanting the Om, following the breath 1,700 times a day, reading the scriptures, picking good company to associate, careful what internet sites they get into. Yoga is not opposed to life. If you want to go to the beach, go to the beach, laugh and dance and sing. As a matter of fact, the God force is the most joyous force I've ever witnessed. very playful, huge sense of humor. My idea is that God is not serious. Finding God is an endeavor, but it doesn't have to be a serious endeavor. You could be intensely searching for the light of God, but not be a serious lady. As a matter of fact, as your meditation becomes deep, you start to laugh and laugh and dance and dance. Whenever you meet a serious guru, know that you haven't met a guru. Somebody who's tasted or come into contact with the God force cannot be a dead serious person. Seriousness comes from ego, which is the opposite to spirituality. Patanjali also says desire is an illusion, in the sense that your 5 senses have been designed to want. Those wants are the wishes of the ego. The ego is a creature who cannot be content. So if your ego says to you, let's just buy a car, and after we buy this car, for the next 6 years, we're not going to want another car. Don't ever be fooled by that. You will never have enough dresses, you will never have enough cars, you will never have enough ice cream cones. So Patanjali says, please do not be fooled by desire. Desire is something that satisfies the 5 senses, but the 5 senses cannot be satisfied. So when you turn your gaze inward, instead of turning your gaze outward, you gain power. Why? Because you're not chasing illusions. When you try to satisfy desire, you are chasing shadows. You will never satisfy desire. But here's something interesting to ponder. If you turn your gaze inward and spend 8 minutes in an empty, calm meditation, you then come out of that meditation and I ask you, what are you missing in life? You won't be able to answer. You'll be fully content because the eyes have been turned inward. Patanjali also talks about concentration. He says you must develop concentration in order to come into contact with the creative force of God. Patanjali says there are 4 levels of concentration. So listen to this. As a novice, when you concentrate on something, there's you, the act of looking, and the act of seeing all the attributes of whatever you're beholding. So, the most elementary level of concentration. There's me, the onlooker, the act of looking, and the attributes of the object that I'm looking at. This is elementary. Second, the second next deeper level of concentration. I become so consumed by what I'm looking at that I lose me in the love of whatever I'm looking at. I'm bedazzled. Bedazzlement means I lose myself. It's like a trance. That's level 2. Level 3, you become so concentrated on something or someone that you understand their essence. If you think of a couple who's been married for 60 years, they start to get to know each other as atoms. So before the man talks, the woman says, don't even think about it. They know each other as atoms. So that's the 3rd level of concentration. In other words, communication without words. You may have a cat and you spend so much time purring with each other that you know the essence of this cat. You know how the cat is going to respond to a particular action before it ever happens. So far, 3 levels of concentration. First, there's me, the act of looking and the object. Second, I lose myself in the object. Third, I go into the essence and the atoms of that object or person. Fourth, I start to look at my own mind. Here's an exercise for you. Go to your bedroom, face some white plaster, start looking at your mind, wondering what the next thought is going to be. That is called meditation on the mind. It's the most challenging meditation in the world of meditation. It's consciousness watching the thought bubbles. So Patanjali says that's even tougher than understanding the essence of something. There's nothing tougher than looking at the mind as an onlooker. The final stage beyond that is that the witness of the mind and the act of thinking all dissolve. This is called samadhi. In other words, you become so still, there is no thinker, there is no witness of the thinker, and there is no act of witnessing. Nothing. Nothing left. This is what I mean by decomposition. In order for you to become one with the God force, you have to decompose. Finally, Patanjali talks about Ishvara. Ishvara is a form of the Lord that you take to. So if you're a Christian and you've grown up in churches and you've seen images of the Mother Mary and Christ, then you're already conditioned to feel like Christ is the Son of God. So according to Patanjali, in this example, the statue of Christ is your Ishvara. If you talk to a nuclear physicist, they'll say to you, the God particle is a probability of subatomic energy coming together. So the nuclear physicist feels comfortable with that statement. A Muslim may see the Prophet Ali as a representative of Allah. And Patanjali says all three are right. Patanjali says it's very important for you to pick a symbol of God that makes sense to you and your culture. So imagine how democratic he was 2,300 years ago. Finally, Patanjali talks about japam. Japam is the act of flipping the rosary beads. They're actually not, in India they're not called rosary beads. The beads in India are made of 108 individual beads. And the theory is that when you repeat a prayer or a sound like Om, 108